In this edition of Interview, we're joined by Simon Penney, Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for the Middle East and Her Majesty's Consul General for Dubai and the Northern Emirates. Simon, thank you for joining us today. Two very different roles.
Well, firstly, thank you very much indeed for having me. And as you say, I do have two roles. One of them is as Trade Commissioner, which gives me a very broad remit across the whole of the Middle East, looking at supporting UK's trade and investment interests across 12 countries. But also I am Her Majesty's Consul General for Dubai and the Northern Emirates, which gives me a very specific focus on the UK's relationship with the Emirate of Dubai and the Emirates.
Tell me about that special relationship between the UAE and the UK.
Well, we're very lucky and privileged, actually, because the UK's relationship with what is now the UAE goes right back to the 1800s, 1820, in fact, when what is now the Emirates became a protectorate of the United Kingdom, all the way through to the formation of the UAE in 1971. So we have, a more than 1.5 century relationship with the Emirates, and that goes back through cultural links now, people links, business links, and it's really important for our future relationship with the UAE. In fact, you will have seen last year that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed visited our Prime Minister Boris Johnson in London, and that visit was reciprocated only last month when our Prime Minister visited the UAE.
It's quite a job, isn't it? And very varied in terms of your day-to-day business.
Yes, it is. And I think for anyone who has done business here in the Middle East, not just in the UAE, will know that sort of politics and government is quite interlinked with business. So in fact, the fact I have a very business-focused role combined with a political role actually gives me quite an advantage, I would say, in being able to engage with our hosts around strategy, around business, and around the evolution of the economic model, both here and across the whole of the Gulf.
Why is it important to cement trade relationships in the GCC and with the UK?
Well, the GCC, in fact, is the UK's third largest export market globally, outside of the European Union, behind only the United States of America and China. And that fact, in many respects, is a very strong foundation on which we are building our trade relationship going forward. In fact, it exceeded more than £40 billion just before COVID. And it's across a whole spectrum of sectors and industries that matter both to the United Kingdom, but also, and arguably more importantly, to the economic transformation that is happening here in the Gulf.
I guess it's more pertinent than ever following the UK leaving the EU at the same time as well.
Well, that's right. It gives us a higher degree of sort of independence and the ability for us to chart our own future with the Gulf and the Middle East. In fact, we are looking now at working on a free trade agreement with the GCC. You
mentioned there the UK GCC free trade agreement. What stage are we at with that, and why is it important?
Well, we actually went out to a consultation to all interested stakeholders who would have an interest in our future trading relationship with the GCC, and that's something we started at the end of last year and concluded in January this year. So we're currently at the stage now where we're working with our GCC hosts and looking at what that mandate will look like as we seek to enter negotiations at some point during the course of this year.
What do you think the future looks like in terms of the UK exporting goods here to the region and vice versa?
Yeah, and as I say, my remit is the Middle East. It's not just the UAE, it's not just the Gulf. And in fact, I was in Jordan only yesterday, where we have what we call an association agreement, which was an agreement the European Union had with Jordan. And we've rolled that agreement over into a bilateral agreement with the UK. And we're looking very closely at how we grow our bilateral relationship with Jordan. We have a similar relationship and agreement with Lebanon, which is also part of my region.
The UAE is the UK's 25th largest trading partner globally. How were supply chains affected over the last 2 years because of COVID?
Well, I guess one thing that COVID highlighted to every country everywhere in the world was just how interlinked and dependent we were on others for what are essential supplies. And particularly here in the Gulf, essential supplies would be things like food and medicines. But I think it's fair to say that the Gulf and the UAE in particular stood up really, really well in terms of securing supply chains. But what it has done is focused our minds as the United Kingdom and all of the countries that I engage with around what supply chains should look like in the future. And part of that is probably reducing dependence on single source and spreading some of that dependence on a wider range of counterparties. And, you know, it won't surprise that we're looking very hard with all of our Gulf and Middle East partners on what those future supply chains could look like in terms of our bilateral relationships.
You haven't always been in office for Her Majesty. You know, you worked in the private sector here in Dubai before. How did you find that transition?
Well, most of my career has been in banking. And in fact, I've lived here in Dubai for the best part of 13 years now. So it's quite a transition, actually, to go from a career in banking into the civil service. But really, the part of the role that resonates most is the Trade Commissioner role, which actually focuses on many of the same areas that I did do in banking. So a lot of it is about relationships, a lot of it is about supporting and financing trade. So I've managed to bring a lot of those skill sets across. And one big area that we focus on is inward investment into the UK. So a lot of my banking work was involved engaging with sovereign wealth funds, which we do a lot of now in my Trade Commissioner role. And you may have seen last year that we signed a £10 billion sovereign investment partnership with the UAE sovereign wealth funds. And that's focusing very much on inward investment into the UK in sectors that matter to the UAE and matter to the UK going forward. It is quite a privilege, having lived here in the private sector and now sitting here as the Consul General. You know, we have more than 100,000 British nationals here in the UAE, and a lot of those do reside here in Dubai. So, yes, it is quite an honour and a privilege to think that one of the responsibilities of my role is to look after British nationals who live here and also visit here as tourists.
You've seen, obviously, Dubai change massively over the last years that you've been living here. How do you think it's positioned itself as a business destination and a global hub for business?
I think for anyone who's been here, you can see it with your own eyes. I mean, over the last 2 decades, it's gone through an exceptional transformation. That's not unique to Dubai or the UAE, though. I mean, you only have to go across Qatar, across Saudi Arabia, across other countries in the Gulf. You're seeing significant economic transformation occurring, and that is going to continue for years and decades to come. So it's a huge opportunity for us as the UK, but most importantly for British businesses who are looking for new markets to expand.
We're here at the British Embassy compound. This place is steeped in history, though. I guess originally when it was built in the 1960s, there was nothing around.
There was very, very little. I mean, we've got some wonderful black and white photographs of this area going back, as you say, to the 50s and the 60s. And really, as far as the eye can see, it's just desert and sand. And the British Embassy compound, which we're sitting in now, was sited very, very close to what was the original centre of Dubai, the Al Fahidi district. And back in the day, the leadership wanted the British Embassy to be as close as possible to the centre of what was then Dubai. But if you were to take that same aerial photograph today, it's been engulfed, of course, as have many other of our embassies across the region as economic expansion has taken hold.
What are your hopes for the rest of your time in office here?
I mean, there's a few things which really I would define success. I mean, you mentioned a free trade agreement with the GCC. That's something which, you know, I've been championing, and I know that we, the UK, are really, really keen to cement, because it will give UK businesses a competitive advantage operating here. So that would be one. The other would be expanding our sovereign investment partnerships with sovereign wealth funds and governments of the region to identify inward investment to the UK. But it's not just all about investment into the UK. It's looking how UK PLC can help here. So investment is another really important part. And the third one, I would say, is just working with UK businesses to identify what we would call barriers to doing business, and working with us to help engage with our host governments to make business easier.
Simon Penney, thank you so much for joining us on Interview today.
Thank you.